And now I'm going to ask our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves. Marjwan?
Hi, everyone. My name is Marjwan Kennedy. I am a writer, director, producer, native Washingtonian, and I currently have my first production as a producer on Broadway.
Hi, I'm Shilpi Malinowski. I'm a writer, oral historian, a photographer. I was a reporter. My work has been in the Washington Post and New York Times and India Abroad. And my most recent project, I collected oral histories of the most gentrified area in the country, probably a section of DC. And I wove everyone's voices together to tell the story of the last 70 years of change, and together with photographs and reporting and my own story. I'm also a resident, so that's me.
Hi everyone, my name is Carlos Carmona Medina. I'm a commercial illustrator, and my series DC is My City is a collection of images that I have done since 2016 that capture life in the capital of the country.
And I'm Reggie Van Lee, and I have the honor of serving as chair of the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, a former dancer who decided I'd be a better patron of the arts than an artist, but happy to serve these amazing artists.
Thank you. Thank you. So amongst many things, we're really grounded today in some core themes that are going to drive the conversation: access, inclusion, equity, and power. And just so that we're all on the same accord, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to define a word, and then if there's some nuance or some room for conversation based on their definition, I'll share out to the panel. So I'm going to offer first to you, Marjwan, if you could take access and what that means to you.
I would say access is taking up space, being in the room, not only being in the room, but also having voice in the room, having space at the table to, like our table here, to be able to speak freely, to speak honestly, to influence change. So access to opportunities, to coming into the room and affecting change in some capacity.
Do we feel good with that definition, panel?
Yeah.
Shilpi, may I have you describe for us inclusive? What does it mean to be inclusive?
To me, inclusive means that everyone is invited, everyone's voice is heard in the conversation. So everyone from every group, and even the individuals within those groups, that everyone is part of the conversation. To me, that feels like inclusivity. And you know, as artists, when we're making art, or when we're making a public project, or engaging with the public, we have to be in conversation with everyone, and their voice is heard. They feel like their voice is heard. That to me is inclusive and inclusivity.
Are we settled with inclusive? All right, Carlos, equity, if you could define equity for us.
I guess like all the three words, like to and especially equity, to the introduction that patients, this the little exercise that we look at each other, and it's like I value your presence here, and I value our conversation. It's pretty much that like willingness to share the table and to have others with you. I mean, it's not one side only. Like everyone in the table, everyone in the group needs to be involved and needs to be acknowledging that the presence of others and the importance that they bring to the conversation.
All right, I think we're good. And I think that equity is a great drive to our last word. Reggie, if you could take power for us.
Power for me is opportunity and activation. And my view is the best way to build your power is to give it away. That's what we need to do. And the most powerful leaders are those that give away their power to those that they're there to serve, and are there to serve people in that sort of way.
And how would you describe the Commission's relation to these driving themes and values that we've had? Access, inclusion, equity, and power. How does the Commission consider these words and ethics in the way that you are mandating your programs and engaging with the public?
The latest view from the Commission is that everything we do has to be seen through the lens of equity, inclusion, diversity, access. That's what is artistic to begin with, and that's what is deserving of the consumers of art. My personal view of what the commission needs to do is to ensure as best we can that every resident in the District of Columbia somehow feels the transformative power of the arts. Whether you are a practicing artist, whether you're enjoying the art, whether you do that for a living or not, art is transformative, and everybody deserves that opportunity. So you can't do that without inclusion. You can't do that without showing the diversity of the art forms. You can't do that without equitably distributing the funds that we do. You can't do that without exerting that power in the way that we need to do it. So everything we do wants to be through the lens of those requirements.
Thank you. And this drives me to, I was really excited for this conversation because I've been sitting on my own observation of the last decade of cultural production and the prominence of this idea as a seat at the table. And my fear, if I may be candid, is that it dismisses often the plethora of tables that exist and the plethora of art worlds, and that we are actually further cementing the prioritization of the mainstream, which has a history of being white culturally dominant. And so my question for the panel is, how do we provide a forum, an arts ecosystem that is inclusive, that is diverse, that is equitable, that does not forego those smaller organizations or institutions or informal means of creating art? I think about Go-Go here in DC, where they're not bound to a venue, they're more nomadic in nature. But we emphasize so much the brick and mortar, the institutions, and that may, from my vantage, also negotiate some of the resources of these smaller tables as we feed a larger table. So, and the hats that we wear, how do we respond to what I'm observing and sitting on and thinking about? I would love to have some discussion.
I mean, I think we first have to acknowledge the small things. Like to make art and to make good art, you need to have food at the table, you need to have housing. I mean, those are essential things. And DC, I mean, it's an expensive city. It's hard to be here. It's hard to be an artist here. And that's how, like, unless you have roots or a partner that works, people most likely are going to be like working from Maryland or Virginia or wherever they're going to find like cheaper places to be. That's why it's so important to have like commissions like this to support those very small details. Because in my experience, like, create art, I can create art with whatever you give me here on the table, no? But I'm not going to be able to if I'm hungry or if my kid doesn't have, like, so, you know. So yeah, just looking at those basic needs will ensure like a better artist or a better art circuit.
I'll say at the commission, we don't believe in the concept of starving artists. We don't feel as though an artist has to starve in order to be creative. And so it's important you are distracted from your art form when you don't have good housing, when you don't have food on the table, when you have to work a job and then try to do your art. So we want to eliminate all those distractions and provide that opportunity for artists to do their thing, things that we can't do. We're consumers of that, and if we really want to be selfish, we want you to be able to do the best art you can. And so the best thing for us is to free you up from all those other burdens. Now, we have a ways to go to get there, but that's the view from the Commission's point of view.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have two thoughts on that. One is that, you know, when people from outside of DC hear about DC, they think of federal Washington and like the transience of that and people kind of coming through. I feel like as artists and humanities workers, we can really focus on people who are living their lives here and like observing, paying attention to real sustainable life in DC. And I think that's something that made me feel much more connected to the city is when I started really paying attention to and gathering these stories from people who are really living here. The other thought I had was I have two children, like school children, and I'm going into high schools this year. Children live here. They are from DC. This is where they are. And I feel like there's an opportunity for the arts community to connect with students more as a way to integrate themselves into the community.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, I grew up here, so I've been able to see how the city has changed, just living here and then going away and coming back. So I think for me as an artist, part of my work has always been connected to community. It's always, yes, I'm gonna make a film or I'm gonna make a play, but how do I have that outreach? How do I build that into the structure? So I think if we are able to, you know, in terms of education, as we educate our artists coming up, whether it's high school, college, university level, building that citizenship, that aspect of, yes, thinking of yourself, you are a craftsperson, but as well as an entrepreneur and as a citizen of your community, and how it is full circle. And just to add also to your question, Malik, I think when we think about art making, I'm always thinking about form and how is form changing in whether it's musical theater, film. And as an artist, how am I pushing that form, challenging what it is that I was taught, what is considered deemable and valuable as art, and disrupting that. I think as artists, we're supposed to be having those conversations. We're not supposed to go along with the grain. We're here to make our presence known and have an opinion. So I think everything that's happening in the world today and in the media, just we should be able to have these dialogues and be respectful of a person's opinion, where they come from, what they're, and as artists, giving them a space to be able to express themselves.
Thank you all. It makes me think about a recent article, I don't know if anyone's read here, the Wall Street Journal calling DC a sleepy art city. And I'm wondering our response, and I think it brings me to this idea of a seat at the table, because for some that table represents New York, LA, a more traditionally viable arts market. And it often dismisses DC as having its own table, one we're sitting at today. And so I would love for you, as if you were speaking to a room of non-Washingtonians, can you describe the DC art scene, and do you perceive it to be sleepy? Whomever wants to chime in firstly.
I mean, I always receive people coming in town, no, and I take them to whatever they want to see. I mean, most of the times they're like the museums and stuff, but I always leave some room for showing them what I perceive is the real deal. And so there is definitely like surprise faces whenever they found out like all the history and diversity that the cultural scene here has. So yeah, let's do more of that. But also, I get tired of people comparing DC to other cities. No, it's like we're not New York, and we don't have to be. It's like we can be very comfortable in our own skin, and we just have to like be sure that the audience, like our audience, our people, is listening, and how can we like enable and make those channels of communication even better, and also keep the money flowing so like the artists can live from their art.
So I have to make a confession. I moved to New York City in 1984. I moved to Washington, D.C. in 2007. When I entered this city, my view was, I'm going to the provinces, this is not New York City, the art scene is not very interesting, and I have been so pleasantly surprised at the diversity of the art scene here. And it's no surprise, it's the nation's capital. You have all these embassies and all these different cultures here, even more so than the New York City. And it manifests itself in what the artists do. But I must say that the platform has not been there in the way that it should be. That it's a best kept secret. And if you go off into the city in various galleries and things, you discover these things that just aren't out there. And so again, the commission wants to shine a light on and nurture and drive a better ecosystem of the arts in this city and move it from DC and Maryland and Virginia to the nation's capital. That's what it really needs to represent. So I think it's here where we need to lift the veil off of it and shine a bright light on it.
What are maybe some ideas then to collaborate with our international neighbors who have embassies and our neighbors in New York? What are some routes then to bridge DC to a larger arts world, if we would, or conversation? As someone who's in between those areas, how might you be able to bridge some of those lines in those cities?
Yeah, well, I've lived in both of those cities for different periods of time, and I would say that what I love about DC, besides being from here, is the community and how we can develop work. I think if any of you follow theater, commercial theater, some of the biggest shows on Broadway have been developed here at Woolly Mammoth, and shows that are coming to New York and touring. So I think because we are in such a safe environment to create, that we're able to push those boundaries a bit more, where New York and LA, it's just about the money. What are we selling? You know, we want the shiny package to sell it out, right? Which, as an artist, that's not what you're about at the foundation. You're about having conversation with, you know, your community, expressing whatever it is, you know, emotionally. I mean, we're about love and connection. So as artists, so I think one thing that is challenging for me, I'll speak for myself. I still work in those other markets because the distribution is there. These markets are where much larger audiences are. There are bigger platforms. For working in film, the technology and the personnel are those industries, especially like in Los Angeles, are just built there for the entire industry to run. So I think that's what attracts, you know, young people. You go to university, you study, and you're coming up, and then you go to these cities because that's where you're told you're going to make it. And I had I won't say I had the exact opposite. I mean, I went to those places to get those skills and get those and I'm so glad that I did. But what I realized is that for me, I needed peace. I needed space for the type of art that really fed me. I needed a home. I needed a family. I needed to spend that time to develop that side of myself, which absolutely feeds my art. So I went down that path. Yeah, I'm gonna go to New York. I want to go to Broadway. I want to go to these places. But as I was there, I just got sucked in and lost myself for some time. But what really grounded me was developing my own work, which brought me back to DC, and then having the commission support so much of my work. I would say over $200,000 over the last 10 years or so is really what has made the larger industries now look at me and say, hey, yeah, I want to work with you. Yeah, come here, come there. So I think we need to rewire a bit that you don't have to leave to do what it is that you want. You have to get the right people in the room. You have to build it. And it takes a lot. It takes a lot. So I think a lot of work in terms of building the infrastructure will need to happen here.
Thank you. I saw you, Carlos, raise your finger.
Yeah, well, like your question and then Marjuan's contribution also like took me to some time in my life before coming here when I was living in Slovakia, and it was a very small village of 300 people. And back then I had just finished college, so what I did in Eastern Europe was jumping from one residency to another, and it was so gratifying to be surrounded by creatives that come from very different backgrounds, and all we needed was, you know, a place to crash, a warm meal, and just like the room to create. And it was so much freedom that I think I carry all those interactions with me. And so I do agree, like one of the projects that we did back then, it was called the peripheral centers, and the idea was connecting peripheries. Like coming from Mexico, we always look to New York, we always look to Paris, we always look to Berlin. But what is people doing in Thailand? You know, like what are they doing in other cities that they are not the centers? Like, do they have like the same challenges that we do as artists? Wouldn't it be cool just like to cross those paths and see how much interaction there are? And those are the opportunities the artist residencies provide, because most of the times you don't have the big budgets. You have, again, a room and a person that you don't know, and how are you going to put those things together, and what is going to come out of that? I'm pretty sure you in dance, you have, you know, that challenge as well, and it's all the time. I mean, you have to have a person with vision to lead everyone in a good direction, but I just love that sparkle, and I feel like I wish there would be more opportunities like those in here as well, not only for artists that are in the middle of their careers, but also like for the youngsters that are up and coming. Is like they know that there is another world in Montana, in like other places that they are not necessarily the big capitals, and especially for folks that are working around like social justice or environmental justice, or there are other places that they are not necessarily the big capitals that we can be linking.
Thank you. Shelby, I want to come to you for a second, because as I think about what makes DC so unique, and I share some of the experience to you, Marjwan, where I went to New York because of the bells and whistles, and I needed that experience, but for the same reasons as you, the kind of mental ease of Washington and the sense of community is why I found my way back. And I know your work in oral history really does document the everyday experiences of Washingtonians. And I think if we bolster up and support, as the Commission has done so generously with the go-go ecosystem, bolster up and elevate what makes us specifically and uniquely Washington, that will help our, for lack of better words, branding outside of Washington. So I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about your work and how you are elevating the stories of everyday Washingtonians.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a great point, that like arts and humanities, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not just like one person creating. We're responding to our environment, and like we're inspired by the things we see. And I think, my work it's oral history, and I'm sort of like trying to synthesize everything that everybody's telling me and weaving it into a cohesive story. And that observational piece of being an artist, that is so tied to where you are, because that's what you're seeing. So I was thinking about what Reggie said, that when you moved here, you didn't really know where to find the art scene. It seemed provincial, and I have that experience as well. And I feel like the Commission is so supportive of artists, and it's actually a good place to be an artist. How do we communicate that to everybody? How do we communicate what's being produced? How do we get our projects out there into the public? I think that's a good question.
I have a vision which I'll share at the end.
Excellent. I think one route that, in relation to the Wall Street Journal article, is bolstering up a community of arts writers and journalists and those who support the creative ecosystem, as you said, those technicians, the stagehands, the videographers and editors, those who make the arts happen. So I think that's one avenue to bolstering up the visibility of what's happening here in Washington. Marjwan, you share your great stewardship and support from the Commission. I'm wondering if Carlos and Chippy, if you all have also been awarded grant dollars from the Commission, if all three can share what the Commission has meant for your individual practice.
I got my first fellowship last year, and it was so meaningful to me. The financial support is helpful, of course, and it's like very encouraging, but I think even more meaningful is that it made me feel like this work is actually justified, and it's actually real work. It's not just me playing around in my room.
We all need to be validated.
It was extremely validating, and I think that was the point. Somebody said this in the video. That was the point when I really felt like, oh, maybe I am, a humanities worker, an artist in this city. That somebody was seeing that work, and even just like emailing Kamanzi with my updates. It's just so nice to have someone acknowledge that what you're doing is real work. It's like a profound psychological shift, I found.
I also did have a grant in 2019. And I do remember there were like some hiccups at the beginning. Like it was a little bit of paperwork and situations that I had to like deal, and I was not the only one. I remember there were like, few threads there, and some press as well. But those are the kind of things that I don't remember anymore. I mean, I thanks to that grant, I was able to put my work aside, like my day job aside for a bit, and focus on my series of illustrations, and then take this to the next level. Just building up portfolio until I had like a decent product, so I could start like selling this in the shops. And so for that I'm always grateful to the Commission as well.
Excellent. And I'm coming also as a commission grantee from an organizational capacity. Marjwan, you're in between those two worlds. So as someone who's leading a nonprofit organization, what do grants mean in your everyday business operations? And for those who are more entrepreneurial, what kind of resources has the commission provided, or what kind of resources are necessary for those who are not necessarily with staff and others are responsible for, but serving primarily as an individual? That's a large question, but I'm gonna offer with Marjwan first because there's two sides.
Sure. Yeah. Well, as an artist, I got my first grant in, I believe it was 2013, so almost 10 years now. And I went to Duke Ellington School of Arts, and I always tell this story because my guidance counselor, I remember when I was applying for college, she said, apply to everything. You never know what you will get. Scholarships, grants, everything. And I always remembered that little seed. And I ended up going to college with almost $80,000 in grants just because I applied. All of these tiny little grants that ended up with, you know, just supporting me and sustaining me. And I actually learned a lot about budgets and grant writing and all of these skills that helped me as a producer from just working as a community organizer in college. And from there, I started to really understand how budgets work in the university system, then in a city system, on the state level, and then going on to grad school. I went to NYU. And at Tisch, I was studying art and public policy. And from there, I really started learning how organizations are funded, why certain organizations are funded more than others, and how nonprofits especially rely, I would say, sometimes 50 to 75% of their organization just on grants alone. And maintaining those relationships are so important. So I'd say for my organization, we just got our first operational funding grant this year of $50,000, which, thank you, which is so helpful because we have so many volunteers. I don't pay myself for that work. We work more. We have worked for the last 7 years on a contract level. But now, you know, we can pay part-time staff, we can continue to scale, and we can see the benefits with the young people that we're serving. So that is so exciting. But I think one thing I always talking with, you know, my peers and artists in DC is that trying to demystify, you know, the grant process. And surprisingly, you know, the DC Commission on the Arts application process just to apply to as an artist has become so much more easier. So it is, so you know, like if you can just show that you're a working artist, I mean, I would say as a individual, I would say about 50% of the support from the commission just is for me to live as an artist. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, so my time is very limited. So I think, you know, all of the artists in DC, if you can show you are a working artist, you should apply, you qualify there, and that's it. That's all, that's all there is.
Thank you. What are the commission dollars meant for you, or what is also your experience through the process? I kind of ashe and affirm the ease of the application process, and it's greatly appreciated.
I think, you know, a lot of this work, the work itself is not that remunerative. Like as an author for the book, it's such a tiny percentage of the profits of the book that go to the author. So it's actually helpful. Having the commission grant funding is practically very, very helpful. But yeah, it's also been, I'm very new to this. I just had it for 1 year and then this year again, but to meet other people in the arts and humanities world who are pursuing entrepreneurship, and you know, I run into people and it's like, oh, I have a walking tour and I have this grant funding. It's so valuable to hear from people within that community. So I'm definitely like looking forward to hearing to more events and like more artist tables to hear how people are making it work in DC.
And it's nice pass the baton to you, Reggie. If you could share a little bit about your vision for the city and for the commission. I know you had one that you're going to share at the end.
Yes, I can do it now.
Okay, excellent. So let's hear the full story of what's to come.
Well, I started with the notion of, at the end of the day, at its highest level, I want every resident to somehow feel the transformative power of the arts. That's at the very top. There are two places in particular that we want to focus that. I aspire for our commission to be the state arts agency equivalent of the Ford Foundation. That is focused on capacity building, that is focused on equity, that is focused on righting the wrongs of the past in a significant sort of way. And to that point, there are many small organizations that either can't afford to file for the 501c3 or have the staff to manage that paperwork. And so we'd like to become the fiscal sponsor for small organizations that do not have 501c3s so that they can receive tax-deductible funds and contributions, but through us as a fiscal sponsor. Now, I'm sure the staff tremble as I say this because it's a lot of work. And it's a lot of work for anybody, but it's especially a lot of work for an agency that's connected to the bureaucracy of a city. But we're going to figure out how to, we're problem solvers, so we're going to figure out how to do that. So the first goal is to really become the Ford Foundation, which is the beacon on the hill and as far as any foundation in this world, not just in this country, would be. The second thing is I would like to start with All All Night and eventually create DC's version of Art Basel. That's the aspiration. So the artists getting that sort of visibility, and we're having discussions about should it just be DC artists or DMV artists, but then we bring in people from the outside, or how we do that. But the light that needs to be shown on those artists could happen if we were to create an equivalent of Art Basel. So those are my two aspects, and I say mine, but it's a collective agenda. When I arrived, I worked with the staff, I worked with the commissioners. A lot of work had been done already before I arrived around benchmarking against other agencies, and we've had a lot of conversations. So I think that the lion's share of us agree that this is something we should aspire to. Now, we may not reach it completely, but moving in that direction would be a big move, and I'm determined for us to reach it, though.
We're excited to hear it. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to open the floor to the panelists, or all of the panelists, but specifically if you have questions of the commission, we have Reggie here as the chairperson. It's a great time to offer any questions, or if you have thoughts of resources that may be helpful for you in your creative endeavors that the commission could steward or support.
And let me punctuate that, because we think that we are trying to do the right stuff, but we don't know who we don't know. And so I can say, this is what I think an artist wants, but only you can tell us. So please, now and going forward, we really need that constant feedback of what works for you, what doesn't work, what's the high priority, what isn't. So.
Yeah, I'll start. I think just based on a lot of conversations I have with my friends who are artists, I think space is a huge issue for us. Not only space to rehearse, but knowing that there is space where we can just convene and we can connect. I have a lot of friends who work in the music industry, and knowing that for them, they have to go to New York or or Atlanta, other spaces to record. So having a recording studio, a space where they can produce high quality music is a conversation. So I think building facilities here where, and I know there are some, but for professional working artists, they feel that they can rent the space, or they could get discounted space or free space to just be able to do the work. I know we've all been working from home and creating virtual experiences and productions, but I think just being back in space with each other and knowing that there are facilities for us to do that creative work is something that is a challenge for us.
And again, I don't want to overcommit, but we've already started conversations with the mayor's office about some of these abandoned spaces in the city that could perhaps become work and live spaces for artists. And again, we got to go through the bureaucracy, we have to sort out how to do it. But we've had a couple of meetings already, and one of the big agenda items, and some of my colleagues in the room are working on it already, is to try to meet that need that you're talking about.
I think I'll echo that space and just like opportunities to convene with other arts and humanities workers, like there's informal networks and it sort of happens serendipitously, but I feel like the commission could make that happen more formally every once in a while. That would be really great.
I envision a WeWorks sort of environment for
Yeah.
artists.
I wanna ask the challenges that you have and the strategies that you have been using to outreach to immigrant populations in DC, like the Ethiopians, the Salvadorians, the Caribbeans. How can we bring them to the table? How can we make their work a little bit more relevant?
You all must be listening in our meetings because this is the topic. And I must admit that we've not done a good job. We've not done a good job. And we are determined to do a better job. The whole cultural aspect of the nation's capital and all the embassies and all the cultures here. And we've not really exercised it in a way that we should. We haven't always translated everything into other languages as we could. We haven't done the outreach in the way that we should. But recently, just this last week, we were talking about the need to do that. We have a committee of the board that's called the IDEA Committee, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access. And one of the tenets of that committee is to make sure that we really reach the cultural aspects in a different way, at least starting with language translation, and then moving to outreach into those communities as well.
Do you think the language is a barrier for artists?
I think it's an excuse.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a real barrier. We can use it as an excuse, but it's doable.
Sure.
I mean, with all the technology you have now, you can talk into a machine in English and it comes out in every language you want it to. So we just need to invest in that and have real intentional interest in it.